Hi everyone, welcome back to Outside the Therapy Room. Today I am joined again by Alex.
Hey.
And we have a brand new guest today, Jordan. Hi
Hey.
Jordan. Thank you for being here. Did you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm one of the therapists here at New Moon. I work with couples and individuals, mostly adults, lots of university age students and that sort of thing. I have a partner and two kids and a Siberian Husky.
Aww.
And so when I'm not working, those four all kind of are kind of the main thing that I'm spending time on is hanging out with all of them, walking the dog, playing with the girls. So a 7-year-old and a 5-month-old, which is wild that it's been 5 months already.
5 months already,
Yeah.
my gosh.
Keeping busy.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
I'm a musician. I love video games, outdoors, exercise, all that stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome. What's your husky's name? No, I'm just
Whistler.
kidding. Whistler.
That's a
so
great
cute.
name.
That is a really good name. That's really good. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
Today's topic is on sleep. So to get prepared for our chat today, I asked my kids about any questions they have around sleep, and they wanted to know why we need sleep, because for them, sleep is really boring. They don't want to go to sleep. And I think that's the same for a lot of kids. And I know for me and my husband with my kids, I'm like, one day you're going to love sleep and you're not going to want to not sleep. You're going to want to sleep the whole day.
Yeah.
So I guess, like, why do we need sleep?
Yeah, so I mean, it's super important for our physical and mental health. It plays a huge role in learning as well, which, I mean, great for kids, right? Kids are learning new stuff all the time.
Yeah.
This is something that I often talk about with the university students I work with. It's like, you might feel like, spending less time sleeping and more time studying might be beneficial, but they've done lots of studies on it, and you're going to be more productive in the study time that you have if you're getting enough sleep, and what you are learning, you will be learning better, and you'll be able to retain that knowledge better for exams and stuff if you're getting enough sleep.
Yeah. Well, I tell my kids all the time that, like, you need sleep. Your brain needs rest just like your body needs rest. And your brain is able to get that rest when you're sleeping, and that will make you, or it'll help you focus a little bit more the next day. It'll help keep you awake and active, and just like you'll be able to use your brain a little bit more during the day. But yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges as we get older with sleep, because like, as you mentioned, with students, they're trying to get a lot done within their day. And sometimes there's the anxiety and the stress of exams or writing a paper that can get in the way of them, like, actually falling asleep and getting there.
For sure.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think when I hear about it in sessions a lot, and a lot of university students, I have the same, I always find that I'm trying to communicate that there's so much positive things because we're looking at repair, right? From exercising, all those things that we need to be able to do. Like you said, repairing your brain when you've had like long days or things happening. And it's also a way that I continuously talk about, is a way to kind of reset. I talk to a lot of people about grief and different things like that, and I find sleep is such an important component that helps keep us on track moving forward and gives us the strength and the space to actually do what we need to be able to do during the day.
Yeah. So I asked some questions on social media, and 80% of followers that answered the poll said that they have a hard time staying asleep, and 100% said that they have a hard time falling asleep. So I find that in the therapy room and outside the therapy room, I find that I hear there's a difference. Some people can fall asleep really quickly, but they might wake up in the middle of the night and not be able to fall back to sleep, or they actually don't have a good quality of sleep. So they're tossing and turning a lot at night, and when they wake up, they'll say that they didn't really have a good sleep. But the falling asleep piece is easy. Whereas on the other hand, falling asleep can be something that's quite challenging for people, but once they're able to fall asleep, they might be able to stay asleep longer, or they might have the same issue where then they're getting up a couple times at night. So yeah, have you guys heard the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's definitely a mix.
Yeah. And some things that get in the way of sleeping from our followers were the love of life. They have so many things that they want to squish into their day. And also lots of books to read. And so sometimes it's kind of like that, bedtime revenge that can also get in the way. You have so many things that you want to do, and sometimes doing that quietly when other people are sleeping in your house is like the best time to do that. Another thing that gets in people's way is work, things that they need to do to get done. So I think, like, again, with the comment you made about students, it can be like, I have to prep for this assignment, and I have to study for this test, and I have to do all of these things. And also just life, right? You want to kind of fit that in. Chronic pain, disability, health anxiety, forgotten tasks, can't turn the brain off, and anxious thoughts were also ones that were shared.
Yeah. I feel like I hear a lot of those things often.
Yeah, I mean, it shows how this is, like, so related to mental health, right? Because all of those things would be things that, I'd be talking to clients about anyway, even if they weren't having sleep issues for the most part, right? Like, there's huge overlap here.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And
so, like, to be a little bit more vulnerable, what's your experience like with sleep?
So I'm a really good sleeper. And a big part of that is, so I'm very lucky with my 5-month-old. I was just telling Alex before we were recording that she slept like 12 hours last night on
That's amazing.
She's an amazing sleeper.
Yeah.
So that's great. Like, I would probably be not getting a lot of good sleep at this stage in my life if it weren't for that.
Yeah.
But I also have pretty solid bedtime routines now. So that is a huge part of that for me. And then also, I think exercise and sleep is a really important thing as well. I think if you are getting exercise during the day, studies I think are showing that will improve your sleep quality, and it'll make it easier to fall asleep. So being active, it doesn't have to be like going to the gym, even just walking more, it will probably have an impact here.
Yeah, I agree. I'm also a really good sleeper. Like, my husband hates it. Sam has a really hard time going to sleep. And I like to watch a comfort show in bed on my iPad, which apparently you're not supposed to do, but it helps me kind of relax. And then I'm listening to the audio, but the minute I hit my pillow and just roll over and decide, okay, I'm done, I'm sleeping, I'm out. And I wake up in the middle of the night here and there, to check on the kids or to go to the washroom. And I'm able to kind of come back into bed and fall asleep pretty easily for the most part. Sam hates it. He's like, oh, I'm so mad at you for being able to fall asleep. And yeah, I feel like with my kiddos too, they had such different sleeps. My oldest had sleep terrors or nighttime terrors. I don't remember what they're called. So he would be asleep, but his eyes would be open and he'd be awake, but he'd be screaming and not being able to know that we're there. It was very scary. It only lasted a few months, thank God. But my youngest came home from the hospital and he slept, and we had to check his breathing because we weren't used to that, and it was really scary to us to just have a kiddo sleeping right off the bat. But yeah, Alex, how is it going? By your eye rolls, I'm assuming you're not a good sleeper.
I'm sitting here listening to you both, and I'm just like, how dare you? I am not a good sleeper at all. I will say, once I'm sleeping, I'm great. I'll sleep through, I do not get up throughout the night to use the bathroom. I rarely get up. I don't really dream, so that's not really a thing unless I'm having, some other anxieties in life that are making me dream about something randomly. Those happen sometimes. But I have the worst time falling asleep. I'm going to say 2 o'clock in the morning. I have a hard time falling asleep.
Oh, wow.
I think my brain is so exhausted sometimes.
Yeah.
But my body is not tired enough sometimes, and sometimes it's reversed the other way around. But I would say I very rarely can lay down and fall asleep. But if I do wake up in the middle of the night, I can go back to sleep easily. So it's just usually the act of falling asleep. My partner is opposite. He can fall asleep in a millisecond.
So you're like Sam. You're
so
mad.
frustrating. And he's a snorer, and I'm like, oh my goodness, what is happening?
Oh no.
But he wakes up a lot throughout the night. But then we'll wake up and like have a full drink and like lay back down and be sleeping in 30 seconds. And I'm like, what is happening? And he's like, did I even wake up? I'm like 18 times. But yeah, I don't know. Sleep's always been an issue for me. Being a parent also doesn't help. And now I have a teenager. So it's always just a house full of teenagers that have ridiculous sleep schedules.
Yeah.
That we try so hard to get them to understand that there needs to be consistency, but there isn't. They are going to figure it out for themselves. But also being a student for 7 years, right?
Yeah.
I was so deep in that trying to beat the clock. I have to do as much as I can in the time that I have. Knowing full well that I was going to do horrible the next day because I needed to sleep.
Yeah.
It's worse when you know that it's going to happen and you're like, I have to do it anyways.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it's frustrating at times, I think, but I think I've gotten so used to it, which I was just saying actually to Jordan before we started this, is I didn't sleep well last night.
Yeah.
I think I probably went to bed at like 1:30 in the morning and I was up at 8. So
how do you do that?
I don't do it. I'm exhausted. But I've gotten used to it.
Yeah.
After so much time of doing it, it's just like normal for me. And part of mine goes into like the health anxiety and chronic pain. So there's a whole thing there.
Yeah.
I have a chronic migraine disorder. And if I sleep too much, I get a headache. If I don't sleep enough, I get a headache. The triggers are horrible. If I get too hot, then I end up waking up in the middle of the night. And that potentially starts health anxiety, because then I'm like, I have to take Tylenol. What if I wake up with a headache? So there's so much fear around what sleep does to me when I'm waking up that I have sometimes a hard time. And sometimes I'm finding myself having to take like an aid to get through that anxiety to get back to sleep when it's that heightened. But that's a huge part of my life. It's been like that for a long time. So it's what I'm used to. So there's a little bit of background into my experiences with it, but it definitely affects my day-to-day sometimes. Like I'm coming into work sometimes exhausted and feeling horrible if I'm working till 8 on a Wednesday night and feeling like yawns are coming, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the one thing I don't want to do in session. So sometimes I have to like take a moment and kind of help myself through it, but it absolutely affects everything. Sleep is a constant thing. I wish that I had the perfect answer for how to make it better. I do not.
Yeah.
Still working on it.
I think chronic pain is a huge thing too. Like my husband has a lot of back pain, and so sometimes it's finding the right position to actually be able to relax and fall asleep without feeling the pain as intensely. And that can a lot of the times be a big factor that gets in the way of being able to sleep. Because during the day we're busy, we're distracted. We might feel the pain, we might feel like the pull or the like the aches, but we're able to kind of move through it because we're distracted by all of the things that we have to do during the day, that at night when we don't have those distractions anymore, we feel the pain more intently, or all of the thoughts throughout the day just kind of come flooding in right at night.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the things that's really important to keep in mind when we talk about sleep hygiene is that it can be another source of anxiety. And I think I really encourage people not to get in their head about like, I have to do the sleep hygiene thing, right? It's like, don't make this another source of anxiety. And so you mentioned the iPad thing, right? Like, so I actually, like, I read comic books before I fall asleep on my iPad. And it's like, I actually think that the whole blue light thing has been a little overblown for people. And that's something that some people get really anxious about. Is like, oh, if I'm on a screen, is it going to mess up my sleep? I don't know that we actually have conclusive data that shows it's actually the blue light. A lot of people are now saying it might be just more the stimulation, right? So if you're scrolling on social media, like that's designed to keep your attention, right? And so that's naturally going to keep you awake. Your brain wants to pay attention to it. It's going to keep you awake. Something like a comfort show or reading a book that you're interested in but's not super gripping, like those can be really good because they occupy your mind and keep your mind off of all of the anxieties and that sort of thing. But not in a way that's so stimulating that it's going to keep you awake, right? So usually, often when people say comfort show, they're talking about a show that they've watched a lot of times before. And it's kind of like a bedtime story in a way,
Yeah, actually,
right?
that's true.
Like my daughter, we always read her a bedtime story before bed, and a lot of those bedtime stories she's heard 1,000 times before. There is something about that seems to be helpful for people. So I mean, a lot of people do audiobooks or different things like that as well. So I think those sorts of things can be really great for getting your mind off of the anxiety about sleep, or just anxiety in general, and can really help get you to sleep if that's the problem that you're having. Some people will actually do that again in the middle of the night if they wake up, right? So it can also be a getting back to sleep sort of support as well.
Actually, I like the times that I do have a hard time falling back asleep, I do put my show back on, but I'm not watching it. I'm just listening. It's Friends. It's Friends. I love Friends. And I know everything that's happening, so I can replay the scene in my head, knowing and being able to hear the audio, and that helps me go to sleep. And I love that you mentioned it's like a bedtime story for adults, because it is. It's comforting. I know it feels good, and it helps me go into that state of sleep. I think with the whole iPad thing, I have had clients also be like, oh my God, is it okay that I have my phone in bed? And I'm like, well, it depends what you're doing with your phone, absolutely. Right? Like, you're right. Like, I feel like social media is so tricky, because you'll be like, I'm going to go on it for 20 minutes. And then you're done and you're like, oh my God, it's been 3 hours. Like what happened? And it is quite stimulating, and it can get us in the way because we don't have those self boundaries to be like, okay, I did a couple scrolling, this felt good for me, and I'm going to put it down and go to sleep. So I think it depends on what kind of content you're going to use that is on a device. Comfort shows, books, audiobooks, comic books, like whatever thing that you're using, if it's going to help bring you to a relaxed state, that's an aid, and it's beneficial and it's helpful for you. If you're watching a first episode of a show that you really like, it might not be so helpful, because you are going to be really stimulated and really into it, and it's going to get in the way of your sleep.
I have this conversation with my partner every night.
Because
he can't go to sleep without the TV on. So this is also a problem. I do not sleep with the TV on. So I compromise because I don't sleep well anyways. And he always puts a show on at the end of the night, and he'll put something on that he hasn't seen, and I'm like, this is a bad idea. He's like, no, I'm like, no, like, you want to see this. Your brain is just going to be so excited to see what's going on. I said, and he always puts on like the same comedy show every night, or like National Geographic animal stuff. Which great. Like, I'm like, okay, I can literally say all these jokes from this comedy show because he watches it every night. I'm like, it's great, it's funny, fine. But because he knows what's going to happen, like you were saying, we talked about this a little while ago, him and I, and we were talking about how he has no surprise. So his anxiety when he sleeps is centered around some grief and stuff over the past few years. But the fact that he has no surprise because he knows exactly what's playing, his anxiety is not peaked. So now he's stuck in this comfort that he's like, it doesn't matter, I'm not going to miss anything, because it's all just normal. His brain is just like, we know this. This is like our lullaby to sleep. For sure. When I'm like, I use a Kindle, which I've always been like, oh my gosh, I use the screen so much. For me, it's not the actual screen, it's the eye strain because of like my migraine disorder, right? So like that is something that is connected to something totally different. But like the intention of it, I think, is such an important piece, because there's a difference between, I don't know, maybe your job is outside all day and you don't look at your phone, or you're not allowed to have your phone and you don't work on a computer all day, and then you come home and watch TV for 2 hours at night, you're fine. Right? Like, it's, if you're looking at your phone from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed, I'd probably say it's not going to help you fall asleep. There's a different way of kind of using our devices that help, and I think, like you said as well too, when we're scrolling, it's always going to make us like, okay, what's that? I have to read this longer, or
it can be triggering, because sometimes there's information that we're scrolling by that is like quite triggering, right? Like things happening around the world, or something new that kind of pops up, something about the news, or it's like, it can kind of spike our anxiety depending on what the content is on social media, or it can make us more curious. And so we're like, oh, let me go research. Right?
Or you're looking up something else because you're like, I'm interested, and then your brain is like, I can't forget.
Yes.
So it starts a whole new thing.
Yeah.
Which is not always helpful. But I think it's always going to matter how much time you put into it and how you're using it.
Exactly.
I turn off my brightness all the way every night. I make sure that if I am using it, it's not something that's making my eyes like, oh my gosh, it's morning.
You can. There's also a setting of like night setting on iPhones. I'm sure it's on most smart devices, but I don't have other smart devices, so I can only speak from iPhones. Yeah. But it reduces the blue light, so it's a little bit more of a yellow tinge, which can sometimes be a little bit more comforting at bedtime. Yeah. So like I think it's, as we're speaking about this, I think it's also important to talk about the environment you need when it's time to go to sleep. I think a lot of people during COVID were struggling with sleep, not only because of all of the stuff that was happening in the world, but I think also because a lot of people were working from home and had to make their office in their bedroom. Yeah. And I think that kind of environment in the bedroom became really challenging for people to fall asleep because work was always there.
Yeah. And you're cooped up, right? You haven't done anything to keep yourself busy and moving. And I mean, anxiety in itself makes us exhausted in so many ways. Yeah. But after you've been living through something for so long, I think you get conditioned to be used to those things. So
the conditioning thing is huge, right? A lot of people really start to associate their bed for lots of different reasons with not sleeping or worrying about sleep, for example, right? I think there was a question about falling asleep on the couch but not in bed.
Yes.
Right? That's probably connected to that, right? This person probably has so many associations now with being worried about sleep when they're trying to be in bed, whereas when they're on the couch, the association is this is relaxing and this is what my downtime. So like I know that in our house, and this just happened naturally, this wasn't like an intentional sleep hygiene thing, but I've noticed like lately, like most of the lights go off in the house and we kind of dim things down in the rooms that we are in at night just because it's just more relaxing anyway, and I do think that's conducive to better sleep, right? There's that association again. And when I mentioned reading, like what I read before bed, I'm not reading that throughout the day, right? So it does become just a thing that I associate with bedtime.
And if like the more that you do those things, like your body's kind of like, okay, this is what we do before bed, and it kind of gets us ready to fall asleep. I think the other factor of it too is like for a lot of students, people who work from home, like having that separation between your bed being for sleep and being for work. Because I remember when I was a kid and I was living at home and I was in university, like I would study on my bed. Like I would prop my laptop on there and that's kind of where I did most of my work. And like sometimes sleep was impacted that way because I'm like, this is the space that I use. But as we get older and we're adults, when some adults have a harder time falling asleep than teenagers. It can be difficult to kind of have that separation. Work is right there. So if your anxiety is going about like all of the tasks, all of the things that you have to do for work the next day, there's a constant reminder there in the corner that like, hey, work is going to happen in the morning. Are you set? Do you have all of these things done? But I think the environment is so important because as you mentioned, Alex, like your partner likes the TV on. We have a TV in our room, but it cannot be turned on at night because I need darkness. I need it to be dark. And it's too bright. Like the TV's too bright. At least on that kid's iPad that we use, like we can dim the light. We can put it upside down on the bed so that the light isn't like so bright that it's bothering me. So it's like that kind of environment. Temperature, I think, is also huge. If it's too hot, you're going to be uncomfortable. Heat can also trigger anxiety symptoms. So if it's too hot, you can't fall asleep. You're like, ugh, gross. Like you're like sweating in bed. But then if it's too cold, sometimes that can be difficult for people to fall asleep too. So it's just finding the right kind of temperature and space for your environment to make it the best for you to be able to go to sleep.
Yeah. I think that all of this requires self-experimentation, right? Like we have a lot of research on sleep out there, but the results of research are always going to be averages, right? So we need to like almost take an experimental approach to our own lives and figure out what works best for us. And I think it's a good idea to like monitor things like in terms of like write it down, right? Like sometimes I think we think, oh, I know what works for me, but then things get kind of twisted in our memory and then it doesn't end up working out as well as we think. So sleep tracking can be helpful, right? And writing down what you're doing. Another big thing is food, right? Like,
Yeah.
like some people, like I know I like to eat a snack before bed, right? Like that helps me fall asleep. But my wife, she's like, I can't, like, I don't want to eat right before bed. That's going to keep me up if I'm like digesting that much food right before bed. So that's like an individual difference. You got to kind of experiment and figure out what works best for you. Yeah. Which also goes to the point of don't get too anxious about doing things the right way, right? The way that people tell you you're supposed to do it. There's good information there, but you need to kind of filter it through your own experience.
Yeah.
It's like very individual.
You said that because like showering for me. Some people are like, I love to have a shower before bed. It makes me sleepy. I'm so wide awake after a shower.
Yeah, I can't shower at night either.
I'm like, what? And like I've even tried to like just have like a simple like Epsom salts bath, anything, and like no, the second. But I also don't use hot water, right? Yeah. So like I'm a little bit more of like it's not cold water. I'm not crazy.
You're like cold plunging in the morning in the shower.
But like I like lukewarm, right? Yeah. Like this idea of like being too hot. Yeah. The actual act of getting hot causes anxiety for me. Yeah. And then we already know that anxiety is already causing us to get hot as well, because that's generally the response that you get. Yeah. My partner likes to be very warm in bed, like double comforter warm.
Oh my God.
And
cozy.
Very cozy. And I am like, we're putting the central air on. Yeah. And it's going to feel like the Arctic in here. And like our bedroom's in the basement. So it's like very cold. Yeah. And he's like, I'm freezing. I need 2 blankets. And then I'm like, your blanket is touching me. So like,
don't let it touch me.
He's like, no, it's not. I'm like, it is touching me. So I like flip it on him, and he's like, it's fine. But then I wake up every morning with his blanket on me. So then I'm like, I'm so overheated. Yeah. So like I have so much anxiety that I'm like, you have a line. Yeah. I love you, but you have a line, and you need to put the blanket on over your line. Yeah. He's like, oh, dude. So if it comes on me, I'll like flip it off of him. And he's like, I'm cold. And I'm like, we need to figure out a better solution.
I think actually, though, you're bringing up a good point. Like, if you go from, like, a relationship to, like, living together and having to sleep in the same bed, it can be quite challenging. Like, you learn new things, different temperatures, different temperaments, different sleep times. Like, all of these things. The way I would sleep on the side of a bed, I wouldn't move. My blanket wouldn't move. Literally, I would wake up in the morning and just like put the cover back over. Wow. And that's it. I'm one of those. And Sam is like all over the place. And I'm like, oh my God, like I can't sleep when the blanket is like too like loose under the sheets and it's ruffled. I'm like, you need to I'm like straightening it and like making it all nice. And he's like, and I'm like, oh, like it just bothers me sometimes.
I'm a tucker.
Yes, I need to like tuck myself in
out so it can stay cool.
Yes.
And the other side in the morning, our sheet is off the corner.
Yeah, I can't.
What happened?
I know, and I think it's just I don't move too much once I'm asleep. Whereas Sam, because again he has like a hard time sleeping and finding comfort. He's moving a lot throughout the day. But I think it's such a huge transition when we go to like sleeping with somebody in the bed. Yeah,
even as the relationship develops too, right? Like I think there was another question about resenting your partner who sleeps better than you. Apparently this is like I'm hearing now this is just a really common dynamic where one partner sleeps better than the other.
I think
or differently at least, right? Like my partner definitely is much more prone to staying up late than I am. So that's this is really normal for there to be a difference. I think it's also like it's a good opportunity to kind of even explore some of your assumptions about relationships, right? Like I remember my mom actually recently being like, oh, your dad and I we're sleeping in separate beds now because he snores and I just thought this was something that you weren't supposed to do for your marriage or whatever. This time.
It's a huge thing.
Yeah, and it's just like, well, it sounds like it's actually been better for your relationship to sleep in different beds now. Now, obviously, that's dependent on having the space in your house to do it. So this is something that obviously, when all of us kids were home, they probably wouldn't have had a way to do it. Yeah. But I do think it's important to like just because it's the way people have always done it doesn't mean that's how you have to do it. If it's going to improve your sleep and you have the option to be able to do it, then that is something that works for a lot of couples.
Yeah, for sure. And also like cuddling, like you see so much on social media about like it was even in a Friends episode, since I already brought Friends, where like you cuddle and then you like push away to be like, no, I'm done. I'm getting overheated, like you said, Alex, or you know, it's like it's nice to have that cuddly time. But you're right, like a lot of times, like, oh, we cuddle to sleep, and we're like, oh, that's so cute. But also, like, I could never do that. And
right?
like even just me and my partner will cuddle, and then I'm like, okay, I'm overheating. I love you. Good night. And then I like roll over. But it's not. I think that's such an important thing to note, that just because we hear something is helpful for a certain couple doesn't mean that it's going to be the same thing for us.
For sure.
So whether that's separate beds, not cuddling, or having like small time to cuddle and then separating, or having like different sheets on the bed, like this is your side, these are your blankets, this is my side, these are my blankets, like all of those things are so important to normalize, because I think it becomes like your mom, like a stressful situation, like we're sleeping in separate beds, oh no, but it's okay, it works for your relationship, and that's what you need to improve your sleep, then
and probably so good for her physical health and mental health.
Yeah.
She's probably so happy.
I would assume it's been beneficial.
For sure.
I think, you know, I was gonna say that I hear that a lot. I have a few friends that are like in separate, and people are like, no, we can't sleep in separate beds, and I'm like, why? Like, as long as you're still putting work into your relationship and you're still actually communicating, I think it's fine to do something that works for you.
Yeah.
The other piece that I just thought about when you were bringing that up, and I don't know why I didn't think about it, because I've lived it, is shift work. Like when people are working. Oh my gosh, yeah. In my relationship, I was working in healthcare, and I was doing like evenings, days, nights, and my partner was working like 2 weeks days, 2 weeks nights. So it turned into this like constant struggle of, on the weeks that it was days, he was in bed by like 8:30, which is fine, but I struggled with that because I was working evenings until 11:30 at night, and then the wind down period was so long, and then when he shifted over, he was like up all night, and I'm like, okay, now I'm on days, like this is not working. And we didn't sleep in separate beds. We just kind of made it work, but we suffered. Like it was horrible for us to go, and it still is. Because I worked in healthcare for 11 years, I think my body is so used to like that timing that I'm still trying to actually figure out a better sleep routine for myself to actually coincide with how my life is now. My partner is now on straight days for 3 years. So it's still for him where he's like, I'm so tired all the time, but I'm still so used to having these switchbacks that it's such a hard thing to get through. And I think that people are always going to try and figure out what works for them in different ways. But we have to pay attention to the things that are actually going on in our life around us.
And I think it kind of goes with what Jordan said of kind of self-experimentation. Like of just being able to see like what works for me right now that may be different than 2 weeks ago. And just being able to give yourself time to do the experiments. I know I'm an impatient person. So I'm like, oh, that didn't work. So that means it doesn't work. But like, just give it another try and see how it goes. But I think an important point you also brought up is shift work. When you're going from working overnights to working days, your body isn't able to create that routine or consistency in sleep. And it can be quite challenging to all of a sudden need to swap to sleeping during the day. And what I've heard it from clients and from some people in my personal life who have done shift work has been that when they do have to sleep during the day, it can be so difficult because you know everyone is out and having their day and you're wanting to socialize with people. Whereas when you're coming home and it's the middle of the night, it's quite isolating. Like you have nobody to talk to. Everyone's asleep. And it kind of creates this and I think it has quite an impact on our mental health because we're not used to having that shift and that loneliness and isolation with what other people are doing.
And your physical health, like when you're shifting back, your body is not dealing well with that change.
It has like no routine.
So it's really hard for your body to actually do anything that it needs to do to keep you healthy and keep you moving forward the way that you need to, because like the way that your body is working, like when you're eating at 3:00 in the morning, like your dinner, your body's not even digesting the same as it would during the day.
All of the clocks are shifted.
Let alone like if you're sleeping during the day and like there's construction, people knocking on the door, it's light out, you have to pick up your kiddos. Like there's so many things that never let you have a consistent sleep when you have shift work, which affects you such like negatively long term.
Totally. Yeah, one of my best friends is a nurse, and he was telling me, I think that the WHO actually declared shift work like a class whatever carcinogen or something like that. It's like almost as bad as smoking. That might be overstating it, but it's like it has very measurable impact on health, which is pretty.
It's scary.
It is scary. Yeah.
And that they still offer, like, obviously somebody has to work nights, but there has to be some better way to at least manage. I think the way to do those things, or offer something to make it a little bit better on our bodies.
Yeah,
right?
and some people, I've heard of people kind of deliberately choosing, okay, I'm just going to take all the night shifts because at least then I have the consistency, which I can understand. That is probably beneficial from the consistency point, but I do think we're a bit hardwired. Not a bit. I think we're hardwired as human beings. We're daytime creatures, right? So, like, you were talking about the social, like, feeling left out if you're trying to sleep during the day. Like, that's a really natural instinct that's being described there.
That we need as humans.
Yeah.
Like that connection, for sure. And I think it also brings up another point. We also asked a poll question on social media of, like, how do you feel when you don't get good sleep? And 60% of people said they feel more irritable, and 40% said they're more tired and slow. And I think when we're when we don't have the amount of sleep that our body is needing or that our brains are needing, it does impact us in a lot of ways. We can become more irritable. Our window of tolerance is a lot smaller. We may not have the capacity for certain things because we're just feeling so exhausted. I know for me, I can be more zoned out and spacey. So I'm like zoning out a little bit more. I might not be able to be aware of what the conversations are that are happening around me, or be able to fully be present for somebody when I'm really, really tired. And so it does impact us in the way that we go about our day. So whether that's, again, like with shift work, or we're connecting with people, if didn't get the level of sleep that we needed, it's going to impact our interactions and how we show up.
Yeah. We make more mistakes, right? Which is okay. But it's hard when we start making those mistakes to be hard on ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that actually goes back to the sleep anxiety thing, though, is I think we have to find ways to frame that for ourselves. That it's it probably will have a negative impact if I don't get enough sleep, but also we don't want to get so in our heads about that that's what we're thinking about when we're trying to fall asleep. It's oh no, it's 12:30 and I'm not asleep yet. That means tomorrow is going to be a total mess. It's just it might be, but you got to figure out. And this is often something that I work with clients on when we're talking about sleep. Is okay, how can we reframe those thoughts? Because they're gonna come, but we have to figure out something that we're gonna do with it, because that will keep you awake, and it will make things even worse if you get too wrapped up in that.
And it might not be a horrible day, right? You might be tired, but it might not be
the self-fulfilling prophecy. It's going to be a terrible day.
It
becomes that.
It becomes hard to trust ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's not a great place to be. We know that, right?
So. Like, I'll tell myself, well, I guess I'm just going to be using more caffeine tomorrow.
Right? But I love that reframe, because you're giving yourself permission to
need a sweet treat.
to get that caffeine. But the other thing that you mentioned too, the countdown. So if you fall asleep at midnight, you're like, okay, if I fall asleep in the next 20 minutes, then that means I'm going to have this many hours of sleep. And then it doesn't. It passes. Then it's 1 o'clock. Oh my gosh. Okay, it's 1 o'clock. If I sleep now, I'm only gonna have 5 hours of sleep, and you're counting down, and that's actually keeping you awake because you're again, a lot of it is that anxiety. But I know with my with some of my clients, we have talked a little bit about when you wake up at 3 a.m. and you're scared to go back to sleep because you have your alarm or somewhere to be at 6. So I'm worried and afraid to go back to sleep because what if I sleep through my alarm, or I need to be up at this time, and so then you can just kind of stay up at that time and not go back to sleep because of that anxiety.
Yeah, with the countdown, I think that's another place where we can think about again, when we look at research, we're getting averages, right? So when researchers tell us 7 to 9 hours is kind of the ideal for an adult. That's 7 to 9 hours on average. That doesn't mean something bad is going to happen if you have 5 hours one night. We can think of this kind of like food too, right? It's just we know fast food isn't good for us, but does that mean that having one meal of fast food it's like if your diet in general is healthy, then there's nothing bad is going to happen if you have this one meal or whatever. So like so that's a good way to kind of reframe it. It's just like, well, one day of within the week, or even a couple days, right? Like as long as we're saying we're gonna try to find a way to come back to where we know things need to be on average at some point. Like there's a lot of leeway. It's one bad night's sleep is not going to destroy your health.
And that's a really important note, because some people will be very rigid in their sleep schedule, which that's fine. But if there's an event that requires them to stay later, that they're going to have enjoyment out of, it's going to help with socialization, it's benefiting them so many ways. There may be that like, oh no, but now I'm up until 1 a.m.
Yeah.
That's okay. Again, maybe not every single night, but that's okay for you to give yourself permission to have those moments where you're able to enjoy things, and it doesn't mean it's going into the consistency. But what you mentioned with hours of sleep, that was one of the questions. Like, do people need different hours of sleep? Is it individual to each person? And I think you kind of answered that saying it is a very general average of 7 to 9 hours of sleep. And some people might need more of it, and some people might need less of it, or are still able to function appropriately and well for themselves if they get less than 6 hours of sleep.
Again, I think it like tracking things can help here to at least just to give yourself a sense of what works for you. I think that you should also be aware of things like your caffeine consumption though. So I sometimes will hear people say, oh, I do fine on 4 hours of sleep a night or whatever, and then you find out that you're
I have
like
20 hours, 20 energy drinks.
It's just like, well, are you really doing fine, or is the caffeine masking the problems that you actually are experiencing? So we do have to be honest with ourselves still. But it's there is a range, and it's set, like I think it's the whatever Sleep Foundation or whatever says 7 to 9 hours for adults. I think it's like 7.5 to 9.5 for teens. So there's even in those two, there's quite a large range, and then as you get younger, it gets more. Like younger kids need more and more, but it's kind of changing like every couple of years.
9 to 10 or something for like children and
So I mean, this is easily Googleable.
I think we're gonna make it one.
But once again, it's averages, and there's usually a range, right? Like even 7 to 9 hours, right? I know I'd probably be feeling better if I was getting consistently 9 hours. But then I would have to get so obsessed with my sleep that I'd be doing nothing else. I wouldn't have any options, right?
Yeah, true.
I was gonna say too, like the other side of it, I've had a client speak about like trying to figure out what's the best amount of time. University, of course, playing a role in that. And I remember having a conversation and saying, yes, this is what we're looking for, 7 to 9. But if you already know, say they're getting 5 hours of sleep every night, like we know that that's not going to be beneficial for you. It doesn't mean you have to shift and sleep 7 hours every night. It means that it's a slow journey. Aim for that one night a week that you get 7, and then you aim for another one, and then you aim for another one. So it slowly becomes something that at least is doable. I think, like you said, putting it on ourselves to like hit this goal immediately is anxiety inducing. It's never going to be helpful.
And it's such a high expectation, and we're so hard on ourselves when we don't meet it.
Absolutely.
It also doesn't work physiologically, I think, right? Like, because often I will like when I used to work with teenagers, going from the transition from summer vacation to school, it's like, I'm staying up until 2 or 3 o'clock every night and then waking up at noon. It's just like, okay, that's like very easy for them to be consistent with that. That's kind of their natural sleep cycle at that stage. But then they're like, as soon as school hits, I'm going to have to be getting up at 6, and so that means I'm going to be going to bed at like 9:30, and it's just like,
doesn't work.
You're not going to be able to flip on a dime there. Like, you're not going to be able to go from, August, you're sleeping. You're going to bed at 12. Because if you go to bed at 9 when you're used to waking up at noon, you're not going to be sleepy, and then you're going to lie in bed there, and you're not going to fall asleep probably until way later anyway. And then you're going to start being like, I'm not tired, I'm lying in bed, so now I'm going to go on my phone. And then it's like all these problems start stacking on top of each other. It's just like I'm anxious that I can't fall asleep when it was unreasonable to expect myself to fall asleep at 9 o'clock anyway.
And it's funny because we see it. They're always like, 2 weeks before or 1 week before, I'm going to be fine. And then we watch students go to school for the first 2 weeks as zombies. Because it didn't work.
But I like having those realistic expectations. And something I do too, it's like, what is an appropriate bedtime for one person may not be an appropriate bedtime for someone else.
Yeah.
My cousin goes to sleep at 7:30 because she wakes up really early to go for a run and do the gym earlier in the day. She has no kids. That works for her
Sounds
and her
amazing
family.
for her.
I cannot. I cannot.
either.
I'm like we're in bed maybe by like 10:30 and I'm falling asleep shortly after that. But like that doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes I watch my show and then I'm like, oh man, I slept up a little late. But I'm always in bed before midnight. But it just, that works for me.
Yeah.
And I wake up at 7:30. So I still am able to get my hours of sleep that I need. Whereas for my cousin, she goes to sleep at 7:30 in the morning. She's able to wake up at 4, whatever her schedule is to do the things that she needs to do. So I think it's, again, you can get the hours of sleep that you need, but you also have to be flexible with what that bedtime is, because it's not going to be what the typical or recommended bedtime
you gotta
sleep
find what
is.
works for you.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I'll actually, one of the pieces of advice I will give people when they're starting to work on this is that I say shoot for consistency first, and then shoot for optimal down the road. So I would say,
that's a good idea.
find the time where you're like, realistically, I know I can fall asleep at this time and I can wake up at this time, even if it's not the ideal amount of hours and it's not as early in the evening that you're going to bed as you want it to. You just be consistent for a while, and then make gradual changes, like 15 minutes at a time. So if you'd rather be going to bed at 10, you're going to bed at midnight, just aim for midnight. And then once you feel like you can consistently go to bed at midnight, as opposed to sometimes midnight, sometimes 1, sometimes 2, whatever. And then just like each week shift it back by like 15 minutes. So it's like, once you've done it consistently for a while, then you go 11:45, then a week or two later, then 11:30, and it takes time. But habits that we take time building usually last longer, so it's probably going to be better in the long run. So then there's some reframing that also has to happen around, I'm playing the long game here. This might not be exactly what I want right now, but I'm going to get there eventually, and this will be helpful to that long-term goal.
And being patient with yourself through that, because it is a long game. Like, your body is having to reset and function a different way than it's been used to doing.
I was going to say, it's important though to listen to your body.
Yes.
That's a huge piece, because for me, I'm not a great sleeper, but I do know that if I start to sleep anything past 8 hours, it actually affects me negatively.
Oh yeah.
My partner can sleep for like 10 hours and he's like, I feel great. And I'm like, I would feel like a zombie if I got over 8 hours. But I know that's my point where it connects a little bit with my like chronic illness side of it, that I know that my body is like, okay, you've had too much downtime and you actually need to get up and like get yourself moving. So I think there's like a line, right? We want to listen to our body. We want to pay attention to what it needs. I probably wouldn't recommend having a nap at 8 o'clock at night if you want to sleep at 10 o'clock. Like, that's probably not helpful. Try to do something to at least get you to that time. But we have to listen to our body in some capacity. Like, it knows what it needs.
Yeah.
And if, I don't know, maybe that day you're going to go to bed at 9 instead of 10 like you wanted and wake up an hour earlier, you're still a little closer to your goal.
Yeah.
So I think we have to just let it be what it needs to be.
Like, listen to your body and then, like, meet your body's need, because I think, like you mentioned, sometimes we'll be like, okay, we're going to sleep right now, but my body's not tired, so I'm gonna do these things that I have time to do now, when in actuality, like, maybe we needed 30 minutes of downtime before we actually started feeling the sleepiness, but now we've gone 2 hours into doing an activity that we needed to do and took away from our sleep. So I think, like, that's or actually, that can also impact, like, bedtime revenge. That's a new term that's come out. And I think a lot of the times, like, I as a mom feel it, where I'm like, oh, the kids took so long to fall asleep today. They're falling asleep at 9. Usually I'm in bed an hour after 9, but I want my downtime. I want time with no kids. I want to enjoy, like, you know, a treat without the kids asking if they can have a bae, or I want to watch my adult show. I want to, like, do those things. And sometimes that can cause us to actually end up, like, putting our sleep time.
I deserve my time.
Yeah. So I don't know, I guess it is like a more, like, a newer term we've heard, and it's, like, popping around social media and stuff. So what's your view of, like, that bedtime revenge?
It's tricky, right? Like, there's probably not a one-size-fits-all solution to that sort of thing, right? Like, because the truth is, like, you do deserve some downtime, right? Like, we all do. Like, we deserve some downtime. We deserve some treats. We deserve, like, all that stuff that someone who's thinking about it in this way is thinking about it, like that's a totally valid way to be looking at this. I think one of the things that I often will do is kind of with the kids is kind of like, you know, reframing that this is they're not going to be like this forever, right? Like there's going to be a day actually where they're really independent at bedtime and that sort of thing. And actually like a little kind of exercise, like mindfulness type exercise that I will sometimes do is like, what will it be like to do this thing for the last time? I'll probably be sad the last time I'm actually...
That makes me so sad.
That makes me so sad too. Like, no.
And so sometimes I have to think of like our lives do come in chapters and stages, right? And so even though I would love to have more time to play video games in the evening, sometimes I have to remind myself, okay, but there will be a time when like bedtime with my daughter is not going to be consuming nearly as much of my evening, and I'm actually going to be grieving that on some level. It's also okay to like I'm not saying we shouldn't feel like, oh, bedtime is stressful and frustrating. Like it's okay to have both.
Yeah, but that happens also.
Yeah,
for sure.
I mean, we can have a conversation just about like parenting and sleeping, and again, just to like, you know, do this little disclaimer, like our conversation today around sleep is very general. We're talking about it in many different views. And we could probably grab one topic and have that be its own podcast episode, including this topic, which is a question we got on social media, which is, why do people with ADHD and autism have sleep issues, and what does it look like? And I think that that's common for a lot of folks with ADHD, is the actual sleep routine and the act of going to sleep. So yeah, what are your views on that?
There's a couple things that stand out to me. So my partner has ADHD, and she tends to sleep much, not as well as I do, and she tends to fall asleep later and that sort of thing. We try to set it up so that she can, when she can, so like right now she's on maternity leave, so this is more doable, but for her to be able to sleep in later than I do. But when she has to go back to work, that's going to be another thing that we'll have to navigate. But there's a couple things that stand out to me. One is that often for people with ADHD, it's a lot easier to kind of get wrapped up in tasks or kind of sucked into things like social media and different things like that are fun, and we should definitely give ourselves permission to do sometimes, will then end up eating up way more time than we intended to. And there's also this phrase, time blindness, that people talk about in ADHD, where you just have a different perception of how time moves, right? And so that's probably another factor. There's also seems to be research showing that people with ADHD just have later circadian rhythm in general. They just fall asleep later and then want to sleep later than the average in the rest of the population. So those are all tricky, and those different things kind of have to be kind of addressed separately. But you know, like with the time blindness thing, like setting timers, right? It's like you're going to be going on social media, maybe setting a timer for it or something like that, especially at bedtime.
But then the added piece is holding yourself accountable. When the timer goes off, that means it's done.
It's the hard part.
Yeah, that's the tricky thing with a lot of stuff with ADHD. And actually, I mean, like, honestly, I don't want to like separate people with ADHD from everyone else, because I think this is true for all of us in a lot of different ways. But it's like, like a lot of the tools that work do require a bit of self accountability, and so that obviously makes it harder, but I think then we have to just set our expectations accordingly when we're looking at the different tools that we're gonna adopt and integrate into our life.
For sure.
I think there's motivation and discipline with that as well, right?
I think it also depends on like how ADHD is for each person. Sometimes it's hyperactivity, sometimes it's more of like the focus piece, because I think if we are hyperactive, sometimes it can, like, actually calming our bodies down and laying down for bed can be like difficult. And so like that's when our thoughts start racing, and that's when like we have nothing to do. We literally have to sleep. And when I was doing some research for this too, it's like restless leg syndrome that can happen with folks who have ADHD around bedtime, where literally their legs are restless or having to move and fidget and like do all of those things that helps their bodies, but it can get in the way of them actually being able to fall asleep.
So I think things like, you know, breathing exercises, meditation, yoga, progressive muscle relaxation is another big one that can help with these sorts of things. Again, self-experimentation, right? Like, because a warm bath could be great for someone or a warm shower can be great for someone like that, but it also could not be. So these are always things to try, and they may or may not work for each individual.
Yeah. And I think as we're wrapping up too, like some tips, I think we've shared some tips throughout our conversation. I think the big one has been be patient with yourself and like set realistic expectations, do some of that self-experimentation so we can see what works for us at that stage in our lives, because again, like moving in with a partner, having a child, going to different work events, like having maybe a moment where things are a little bit more social, there's a lot of events happening, we have to shift, and we need to give ourselves that permission to have that shift. I think another thing is like the wind down time before bed. So I like to tell clients, and this is something I have for myself too, is like I give myself some time before I actually want to be falling asleep to have that wind down time. So I think, Jordan, you mentioned like the lights are off. They're like, you know, you've dimmed the lights to kind of create that more relaxation, sleepy time environment. It can look that way. It can be doing some things that bring more relaxation, like reading, maybe taking a shower for some people. Maybe for others, it is like a light workout, yoga, anything like that, to then have that wind down time before actually going to bed. I think for racing thoughts, something that's helpful for me, the times that it has happened, is doing like a body scan exercise where I'll go from like head to toe or toe to head and just kind of focus on each body part. And usually if I'm going toe to head, like by the time I reach my knees, I'm like falling, I'm like drowsy and ready to go to sleep.
I've heard that from people when I've suggested that sort of thing, for sure.
Yeah.
Usually you don't get through the whole body if you're
Exactly. So being able to find ways to kind of, especially like with those racing minds, to kind of just distract yourself from the racing mind and be a little bit more present. Another thing that helps a lot is the like breathing exercises. And one that I really like is the 4-7-8. So you breathe in for 4 seconds, you hold it for 7, and you exhale for 8. But you have to give yourself some time. We can't just do that once or twice and expect something to happen. We need to do it a little bit more consistently, because it takes time for our heart rate to go down, which impacts our racing thoughts and like clears our mind, and we're able to kind of feel a little bit more calm in that. So being able to practice an exercise like that can be helpful. And then I think the big thing that we talked about too is consistency. So if possible, when possible, being able to have a consistent time that works for us, like depending again on where we're at with our lives, it can help normalize our sleep, and it can kind of have our body already being like, oh, it's almost sleep time, or we might start feeling tired at certain times of the day. So yeah, we are creatures of habit, I feel, as humans. So kind of creating that habit is helpful.
I was going to add on 2 things, if you don't mind. I don't know if it's helpful to wait until you're sleeping to focus in on the fact that you have anxiety. If anxiety is there, try to actually like sit with it and understand it before you get to this point of trying to fall asleep. That's not going to work the best for you. And if you're realizing that maybe in the evening you're having a little bit more anxiety, maybe trying to figure out where that's coming from before you're basing it on just sleeping, because it might not actually be from that, which might help you later on have a better sleep. The other side I was going to say too is a little bit more on the sleep revenge. And I think it's just me wondering if it's worth it to look into connections for that, to see if it's not so much about like having your own time and doing things. We have to pay attention to the fact that you're allowed to have quiet time if you need it. Sometimes we have to create that for ourselves. And if there's no place to create it, then that's coming into communication, into your relationship, or communication with your support network, to make sure that you're actually getting what you need. That's a whole different conversation about connection and actually communicating with people. And it's not necessarily directed right into that sleep pattern. It's just another area that maybe needs to be looked at.
For sure. Yeah, I think that's really important.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to mention too, we talked a lot about finding what works for us, and I wanted to just say a little bit about what that actually means. Like, how do I know if it works for me, right? Like, we talked about tracking things, and there's certainly things that you can find through tracking, but also if the idea of incorporating this whatever habit or a routine actually makes you feel more anxious, or you're not looking forward to it. So some people will be like, oh, I have to read this whatever self-improvement book before
Yeah.
bed. It's
Textbook for
if
school.
if the thing that you're trying to do to help you fall asleep isn't something that you really look forward to, then chances are you're not gonna do it very much,
Yeah.
and then the
It's not
consistency won't
relaxing.
be. Yeah, and so then that's not working for you if you don't think you're gonna enjoy it. So with all these things, that's something to keep an eye on. It's like lots of things could work, but if you don't enjoy it, or you dread doing it, or you're not looking forward to doing it before bed, then probably isn't going to work for you.
Yes.
And the thing that works, the thing that isn't perfect but works is so much better than the thing that is theoretically perfect but doesn't actually work for you.
And that's like knowing yourself.
Yeah.
Totally.
Like I can't journal. Like that's just not something that works for me.
Yeah.
And a lot of pages out there, a lot of people say like journaling before bed can be quite helpful, and it can. That's just not for me. So that's not going to be something I'm going to use as my calming down before bed. There's going to be and there's so many amazing things that can be more individual. Like again, for you it's reading comic books. It's like that may not be my thing. My thing is watching Friends, right?
Yeah.
So like being
Just
able
focus on
to
enjoyment, right?
and on what brings relaxation for you.
Yeah.
And so just being able to pay attention to that without this like added pressure and expectation of needing to do it like, you know, somebody suggested.
And that can be different every day. It doesn't have to be the same thing every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for all of your information on sleep. Hopefully you're able to sleep well tonight. But thank you again so much. And thank you guys for joining us again. Make sure to follow us on Outside the Therapy Room Pod for some behind the scenes and upcoming episodes. And yeah, have a good sleep.